right, so I guess I'm in between you guys, one panel session and drinks. Is that right? All right, so then my job is to make this interesting and entertaining. So this is all about the convergence of marketing and what is the role of data and creativity in what we're doing today. And I think, first of all, I love this image. Who did this last night? No one? Wait, what? No one did this? No one sat around a box and there was a black and white picture streaming at you and brands yelling at you from a TV box? That's insane. But this is actually how marketing started. And so 75 years ago, this is what the challenge for marketers was. It was actually, what is the message that the brand wants to say? Let me yell it to you. You have a completely captive audience and everyone is surrounded around this one thing. And the reality is that today, there are no more captive audiences. It doesn't exist. So must-see TV has been replaced by all of these different types of devices and all of these other different type of interactive tools. And we now as marketers have to start to connect them all together. And I think my presentation, there probably aren't going to be things in here that you've never heard before, but it's actually just more about opening up a conversation about the challenges that we have today as marketers. And I think that, and one of the biggest things is that storytelling has become fluid. And sometimes I roll my eyes a little bit when I think about the marketing jargon that we have, like storytelling is becoming fluid. But that's actually what it is. And I think the reality is that when you have sports sponsorships or when you have kind of main vehicles that you're launching, you're having to find how to connect those stories across all of the different platforms where consumers are, across all of the different devices where consumers are. And that's a huge challenge because the budgets aren't getting significantly bigger. The production dollars aren't getting significantly bigger, so we have to be much smarter in how we reach consumers, and more importantly, what is it that we want to say to them? How do we want to have those conversations with them? So this takes me to the goldfish, which is actually the spirit animal of the marketing team at Nissan. So Facebook did a study a little while ago that actually found that goldfish have, or actually human beings have less attention span than that of a goldfish. So think about that. Goldfish have the attention span of 9 seconds, and human beings have the attention span of 8.2 seconds. So we are right now trying to target and market towards goldfish, people that have the attention span of a goldfish. And that can be exhausting. But it also means that it's really important for us to use all of the tools that we have. We need to use all of the data that we have, and we have to be super creative in how we reach people and what it is that we say in the conversations that we want to have with people. So it's bringing in this new era of marketing. And we have all of these tools at our disposal, the new era of marketing, traditional models are being completely disrupted. And I think we're all still trying to figure out how to put all of the pieces together. And I think probably the biggest catalyst of this is the mobile phone. So now you have all of the information that you need. You have brands that are popping up across all of these different devices, but the mobile phone, because of its access, because it's something that every single consumer is using and having, that is really the main catalyst for this. So according to a recent study by Adobe, more than 30% of online purchases are done via smartphone. Actually, I kind of thought that number would have been higher, but that's the reality of it. And I think that will continue to grow and grow and grow, especially as we think about we're all getting ready to put together our Black Friday events and what's going into the holiday. But all of this will start to be done online. And what does that mean in automotive, where we still have a little bit of a barrier, actually quite a big barrier, between how we're marketing to consumers and what that actual experience is when you're actually in the showroom. So all of these digital footprints and all of these digital points, it actually creates this entire data ecosystem. And it used to be ones and zeros, but actually it's more about what are the insights, what are the things that we know about consumers, and how can we use that information, how can we empower it with more impactful communications. So it's created this hyper data-driven economy, and it's kind of created what we call precision marketing at Nissan, performance marketing, targeted marketing. Those are all kind of the jargon that we use. But essentially, it's how can we deliver the right message at the right time to the right consumer wherever they are in the shopping process. And that could mean that they're ready to buy a car today, or it could mean that they're going to be passively looking for the next 6 months. We know that type of information about consumers. So how do we use that to our advantage? How do we use it to actually create things that are much more impactful for consumers? Because they are really at the core of this. So customers are at the core. They are the ones that are driving the types of interactions that they want to have with brands. They're the ones that are driving the types of conversations that they have. no more is it a matter of, a manufacturer is getting ready to launch a specific model. We're just going to blast that message out to everybody, and consumers are going to magically show up at the showroom. That doesn't exist anymore. What consumers are expecting is that they're expecting personalized or as close to personalized information as you can get based on what the indicators that they've given to us. So I'm interested in a GTR. Please do not serve up a cargo van to me. I don't want to hear it. I'm interested in a GTR. Serve that up to me. And so I think, consumers are definitely the ones that are driving. And I think, and it varies by generation as well. So we can't just market to Gen X or millennials or Gen Z. We have to market to everyone across all of our demographics that we have. And so you have some of the older generations that they're digital agnostic. They're becoming much more comfortable with technology. They understand that this is what they have, and they're finding ways for it to connect with families. How do you find information that you need? And then you have all the way down to Gen Z. And Gen Z, it's not just about, they don't think about tech, actually. Tech is an extension of who they are. This is part of their everyday lives. And Gen Z, they aren't buying vehicles yet, but that will rapidly start to change. They are starting to become more and more of, they don't have all the purchase power yet, but they're getting that. And the way that they're consuming brands, the way that they're consuming content, the way that they're discovering brands is so dramatically different. And so now, in addition to having to market to goldfish, already enough of a challenge, but now we have to also target to all of these different demographics who have different shopping behaviors. They have different consumption of technology. So how do we actually start to think about how do we approach this? And to me, I mean, it's exhausting. But I think some of the things that we're seeing, and these are a couple stats for Gen Z, but 12-year-old is the median age for everyone's first smartphone. I don't think that's, that's not necessarily shocking. 2 and 3 teens are already making online purchases. Whose family allows that yet? 53% of Gen Z use their smartphone for online purchases. So maybe you don't know that they're doing this, but they really are doing that. And so I think these are 53%. And if you think about the earlier stat from Adobe, that shows how much more Gen Z is actually purchasing than the general population, which is huge. Which it means that we have to really start to ramp up how we use data, how we use our messaging platforms, how we really start to be much more agile and adaptable in how we reach consumers. So a couple other stats about Gen Z, just because they're so fascinating right now. There are more and more touch points, more data, and more opportunities to engage with Gen Z. They're really working in mobile digital environments. That's their natural state. So we now need to start to have much more adaptive platforms. And I think the risk in automotive is that we're a little bit behind the times. I think we're not as quick moving as CPG industries are. We still have a little bit more of a mature industry. So how do we ramp up quickly to deliver on these digital customer experiences? And I can imagine that for any other OEMs in the room, I can't imagine how many other meetings that you sit in about digital customer experiences. And I think the reality is that we really need to break through in this area because we need to be ready for these customers that are coming up, and they will be having the purchasing power very, very soon. So all of this data and all of this information, it's creating a lot of data points. And this is an example of, in the next 60 seconds, and there's a timer, so Amazon, over 1,000 packages have been shipped in 60 seconds. Uber has had almost 1,400 rides. Tinder, almost 7,000 matches. Maybe in this room. Instagram, almost 50,000 photos posted. Venmo, 68,000 peer-to-peer transactions when it comes to currency. This is the new type of currency. Netflix, 97-hour streams. I may have had a few of those this weekend. Spotify, 750,000 songs streamed. And then lastly, YouTube, the behemoth, 4.3 million videos watched. In the last 60 seconds, all of this data has been generated. All of this activity has been taking place. That's astounding. That's mind-boggling, actually. So the customer never sleeps. So we have 2.5 quintillion bytes of data are created every single day. And I saw an interesting stat. By next year, by 2020, there will be 40 times more bytes of data than there are stars in the observable universe. Bytes of data. And think about how quickly that has ramped up. So what it was this 10 years ago was probably just a complete fraction of what this data is today. And so what does all of this mean? Why does this matter? It means that we can be much more impactful with what we're communicating and how we reach consumers. It means that we can have personalized messages. We now know that it's important to be targeting, especially in automotive, when it comes to life stages and where the changes are happening when you're going to be more likely to purchase a vehicle. Expecting families, that's an example of it. So parents with young kids, we know that that's an interesting demographic. But actually what you can get down to and what data enables us to do and empowers us to do is get down to tattooed motorcycle moms from Cleveland. We can get down to this actual small fraction of consumers. And that's incredible. But then we have to structure ourselves. We have to create an environment that allows for this type of marketing to actually happen. We have the data that enables it. Now we need to have the creativity that empowers it. So where does creativity live in a data-driven world? And I think consumers aren't robots. They know when it feels like they're being marketed to, and it's done in a very templated way. We actually know, especially when you're working on lead generation forms, it's not just about how quickly you respond. Right now, the more important thing is actually the quality of that response. And the reason for that is because consumers are becoming, fatigued with the type of information that they're getting, with the type of fast responses. They're now wanting something that's much more custom, much more relatable, much more personal to them. And so this is why, we have to really be impactful in what our messages is. Data is not the answer. Data, it's a means to an end. The data is what empowers the creativity, but the creative is actually what's going to break through. So creative has become, it's never been more important for the creative to be impactful with what we're doing as marketers. This is an example of what you can start to do with creative, and I'm going to show a few examples here. I can actually sit and watch this for a scary amount of time, but actually an artist, Aaron Colvin, took, this is flight information data that is being pulled from the United States, and he started to visualize it. So he actually turned this into art. And I think the thing that's really interesting about that is, airline travel is very stressful. It's supposed to be, sophisticated, it's supposed to be glamorous. It's actually super stressful. But what he did is he took stressful experiences and stressful data points and turned it into art. And I think that's an interesting example of what data starts to empower. At Infinity, what we did is we also tied to this is actually human experiences. So at Pebble Beach, we actually connected biometrics, so how people were reacting physically to the car, and this was the Q60. It was hot. We actually connected to the bio, so we had them hooked up to sensors. We had cameras set up in the experience. And we actually were starting to watch their pupil, their heart rate, how their breathing was, and we actually started to map that into pieces of art that we gave away at the end of the experience. And I don't know about you guys, but I've always wanted to connect kind of the physical response to vehicles just because they're so freaking sexy. But how do you start to connect that? How do you create that actual visualization of what that looks like? And that's what data starts to enable. Adidas also did something interesting. I recently moved from Japan back to the US, and there was something really interesting that they did in Tokyo. Tokyo has more lights than any other city kind of per capita. And so I'm a runner, and as a runner, that's incredibly frustrating because you can only go a block and then you're stopped at a light, and it's super, and you don't jaywalk, please do not jaywalk in Tokyo. It is not allowed. But what Adidas did is that they actually started to map the lights. And so they actually created and they started to feed it to their users what the ultimate run was. So how could you get the miracle run where you would hit all of the green lights? And they mapped that and they did this full experience around, kind of the ultimate run in Tokyo. So data needs to live in the service of creativity. And I think what we're looking at with this is that us for marketers, we have all these complicated things that we need to do. How do you sell the cars? How do you do that profitably? How do you manage your budgets across all of these different platforms? How do you make sure that the sales team is feeling good about it? How do you make sure the dealers are happy? You have to manage all these other things. And you also have to market to people that have the attention span of a goldfish. And that's a lot to try to do. And I don't have all the tools, but I can tell you what we've been trying to do, at least on the Nissan side. And I think what we've been working on is how do we start to create, how do we bring creativity into what we're doing? What we're seeing is that the more impactful you can be with messaging, the more you're paying attention to the creativity. And this is also important in things like programmatic, where you tend to just be very templated. Dynamic creative optimization can get you into a very functional point of view. But actually, it's even more important for that creative to break through. So copy is important. imagery is important. It can't just be something that's a static image and then generic copy. That isn't going to work anymore. So what we've been working on is how do you actually create the emotional connection of people to the technology. And I think the other thing that's happening in the automotive space is that the technology is becoming more and more complex. We know that consumers are actually already a little bit afraid of it. So how do you talk about autonomous drive? How do you talk about electric in a way that's going to make people give a shit? Because that's ultimately what we're trying to do when it comes to creative. This is an example of what we started to do for Rogue, which is the #1 selling model that we have for Nissan. How do you start to show how the technology can live in a world of distraction? How can technology be good technology in the face of sometimes what is bad technology? And then also, how do you create personalized experiences for all the different demographics and all the different audience segments that we have? So I'm going to take you through some creative examples. Hopefully. Yeah.
This is protection in a world of distraction. This is Nissan Intelligent Mobility.
So the overall idea was this is protection in a world of distraction. And then how do we start to take that message and bring it into all of the different audience segments that we have? So what we've started to do is we've developed advanced audience segmentation across all of our core models and all of our launch models. And then we're creating personalized creative for that. And so we've gone from where you have one TV spot and then a handful of banner ads or dynamic or DCO into something where we're creating hundreds of pieces of assets that go with every single campaign. So this is an example of some of the creative, again, about how do you explain technology in a world of distraction across all of the different audience segments. And this is just a sample of this. I think there are hundreds of them that we had. The first example is this is for audiences with young children.
Where's Dad? This is the 2020 Nissan Rogue with rear automatic braking. This is Nissan Intelligent Mobility.
And this is an example of parents with older teenage kids.
Hi, Brad.
This is the 2020 Nissan Rogue with automatic emergency braking. This is Nissan Intelligent Mobility.
And then young adults, this is the first big car purchase that they have.
This is the 2020 Nissan Rogue with blind spot warning.
You can tell who's had that happen to them. And then lastly, baby boomers. We do not market to baby boomers because we get so caught up with millennials, but they are an important audience for automotive. They are the biggest car purchasers. So let's make sure we also talk to baby boomers and people who are empty nesters.
This is the 2020 Nissan Rogue with rear automatic braking. This is Nissan Intelligent Mobility.
And so that's just an example of some of the creative that we're starting to develop. And again, we're doing this across our entire lineup. And I think the other thing is that these are also 15 seconds. We also have 6 seconds. So if we know that goldfish have the attention span of 8.2 seconds, let's just go and get out in front of that and create what is that complicated technology and how do you actually tell that story in 6 seconds. So for me, the goldfish is our spirit animal. This is how consumers are behaving today. And ultimately, this is why creativity is and always will be queen. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Allyson. Oh, I was going to say, if there's no questions for Allyson, I'm going to be shocked. If you could say your name and where you're from.
I'm Daniel, and I'm from Twitter. This isn't a Twitter-related question. This is actually more towards the creative agency and towards for you guys, which is when you're in a position of having to create that many different assets per campaign, how do you keep not just production costs, but talent costs in check? Because those can obviously balloon if you make 6 little spots for one spot. Talent balloons anyway.
The challenge is real on that side of it. I would say the first thing is that we completely started to restructure the agency team. So we had, in the case of Nissan, we had, 10 different main agencies that were working across different segments. We worked with the holding company to actually start to collapse that into one team. The idea of that isn't new. I think a lot of brands have done that or are in the process of doing that. I think what we did is we started to organize all of those teams across our vehicle segments. And so when we're going in and giving a brief, we're not giving 10 different briefs anymore. It's one brief. This is one agency team. So in the case of Rogue, this went to the SUV team. Come back to us with what that full plan is across all of the audience segments, which also included multicultural. It included all of the digital assets that we needed to have on the website, on brochure content. All of that was part of it. The talent piece of it was actually one of the things that we've been working with as well. I think there was some offshore talent that we shot there. We're starting to combine shoots. I think the idea of a super shoot, also not new. The way that you do it actually has to be really smart. And so you're starting to look at how do we use the talent? How do you use offshore talent? How can you find some of those? How can you solve some of those challenges that way? I think also it's in the creative idea. So understanding what those budgets are up front and what the impact of a lot of talent will use. I think we ended up shooting the kind of the phone one. We shot that offshore because of all of the on-camera talent that it was going to have. And so I think we're going through that. We're having very open, honest conversations with the agency team on that. Because you're right. I mean, you could have a really great idea, but next thing you know, you're spending millions and millions of dollars in TNR. So it is part of the upfront production process. I think we've gone through different iterations of it, and I think we've now kind of rolled out this approach across all of our core models. We're starting to get much better at it. We're having those conversations up front at the concepting stage, so we know if we're walking into a big red flag, and then how do we adjust. But I think having everyone work across the same thing so you're not having different teams start to produce different work, I think that was a big breakthrough for us on our side.
We've got a question back here.
Hi, I'm Mark from Newstar.
Hi.
Are you tracking sales back to those individual demographic groups so that you're able to sort of measure the effectiveness of all those different?
We don't have it tied all the way back to the individual sales, but we do have kind of we do have it tied back to as far to sales as we can get. I think on our case, and I imagine we're not the only OEM with this challenge, but because the CRM systems are disconnected at a dealer level, we're not able to get it all the way to sale. We're working towards showroom traffic, which is kind of as close as we can get at this point. But I think the holy grail is really going to be, can you track it back to individual sale? But there's a lot of infrastructure that has to change for that. I think one of the more interesting things about this is actually the conversations that we're having about marketing and marketing effectiveness. And we're having it at a much more operational level than we have in the past. And so it used to be, what is the website traffic number? And we had a key buying actions, and you had kind of one single KPI that was supposed to explain all of the marketing that you're doing across all of the audience demographic. So we've started to break that down and kind of really talk about where we're targeting consumers, where they are in the funnel, and then how are we performing at those different stages versus just one single KPI. And so I think, obviously, the CFO obviously wants us to track it back to individual sale. We're not there yet, but we can track it to the showroom traffic level, which is a big advancement, at least on our side, because it's been a big infrastructure and data analytics overhaul.
Any other questions? Well, with that, thank you,
Cocktails.
Allyson.